In this class, we are not going to focus on creating standard web pages. We're not going to learn about HTML or CSS or JavaScript. We want to focus on Python, and we want to focus on writing programs that can run on servers that can respond to client requests to do things. Now, it turns out along the way we will in fact be able to build some web pages, but mostly we will provide that. But what your job is going to be is to focus on writing programs that take in data, process it, and respond to data. And it turns out that will enable us to do all kinds of really cool things. However, the way that we do that is not to build standard web pages. So instead of learning HTML, we are going to learn a very simple mechanism for transporting data from one computer to another in a computer-readable format that is very commonly used, and it also happens to be in a format that's pretty easy for humans to read. And that format is called JSON. JSON, J-S-O-N, is JavaScript object notation. It is a mechanism for taking very simple dictionaries, really key value pairs, the kind that we're used to in Python, and encoding them in a standard string format that can be transmitted across HTTP and received and parsed and interpreted on the receiving end, and you can extract data from it. You can also use it for sending data to programs. So let's just dive in and see what it looks like and how to use it in Python. It actually looks just like a Python dictionary. You've got a curly brace with value, key, colon, value, key, colon, value. In fact, we don't even really need to worry exactly what the format for JSON is, because Python has a utility to basically take Python data structures and turn it into JSON so that you can then send it across the web, and it can receive JSON in string format and interpret it and put it back into a Python data structure. So let's write a simple Python server program using Google App Engine to create some JSON data. At the moment, I just want to focus on how this whole thing works, so we'll come up with we'll use a very simple example. We'll just make a list of numbers and some computational value. We'll just use squares. So for every number, we'll compute its square, and we'll just make a simple JSON holding a list of squares and numbers and squares. So let's open up our program. Remember, this is what we've had so far. We just have essentially a get handler that returns a string. Instead, let's have our get handler generate a JSON value with a list of squares. Well, first we need to make a list of squares. So let's just go ahead and write a completely standard Python method that will generate some squares. So how about we'll call it square list, and for now we'll just always generate, say, a list of 10 squares. So we'll make our list, we'll call it squares. Actually, it's not really going to be a list, it's going to be a dictionary, so let's not call it list, let's just call it squares, and maybe we'll define a square dictionary, make an empty dictionary, and we'll just loop for I in range. Maybe we'll just do 10 of these things, and we'll just fill in the dictionary. Square of I equals I times I. It's square dictionary. There we go, right? So it'll store as a key the integer I, which will be from 0 to 9, and we'll store the value, the square, which is I times I. And then we can go ahead and return this dictionary to the caller, right? This is a standard Python program just like we've written before, but now it'll run on the server in response to a GET request. So what we'll do is we will call this self.square method and store the result in our own local variable. We'll call it square dictionary. And instead of writing the string, what we want to do is return the dictionary, but we can't write out to HTTP a Python data structure. We have to write a string. And so what we're going to do is use a JSON utility. I've already imported it here, import JSON. And we can go ahead and just use one of the two methods we're going to care about. The first one is dump s, dump string. In other words, take a data structure and dump it into a string, and it will be a JSON formatted string. So we'll just put in square dict and convert it into JSON and send it back to the caller. that's it. Let's go to our program, right, to our web browser, and we can test our program just by refreshing the browser. And look at that. We have now got a JSON string that contains our values, right? And we can see it looks really just like a Python dictionary. Curly brace, the key 0 has a value of 0, the key 1 has a value of 1, the key 2 has a value of 4, and so on. It turns out that JSON is so common that it's very convenient to be able to look at JSON values in a way that they're formatted a little bit more prettily for humans to read. This is such a common need that there are browser plugins that do this for you. And I've actually already installed one in my browser called Chrome. I haven't enabled it yet. So let me just bring up my Chrome extensions through my preferences, and you'll see I've actually installed a plugin, an extension called JSON View, and you can go visit the Chrome store and download this for free, enable it, and what this does is every time your browser tries to display some JSON, when you refresh the page, it will do it prettily. So this is what it looked like before. Now that the extension is turned on, I refresh the page, and look at this. It shows it to me in a nice, simple, human readable format, and it puts a little thing over here that lets me configure it and do various things, including seeing the original source, and so I can go back and see exactly what it looked like before it got formatted. So I'm just going to leave this extension on, which is what I usually do. Makes it much easier for debugging. So we have written a program that can execute some code and output JSON. That is a really good first step. The other part of really any kind of client-server interaction where I want to make a request to a server so I can do something is I need to be able to give it some input. I need to be able to say what I want. I just don't want always a list of 10 squares. Maybe I want to say that I want 10 squares not starting at 0, but 10 squares starting at 100. So I need to be able to have a way of passing some input to the server. Well, you may have seen in using the web that there is such a thing called a URL parameter. A URL parameter is something that you add to the end of a URL, the kind of URL we've already talked about, after a question mark. Basically, everything after a question mark is a parameter. And so what I've done here, you can see I've already tested this, so I've got some in my memory. But what I'm going to say is I want to send a parameter to the server that says I want the num squared. Actually, let's start with start. I'm sorry, localhost :8080 / question mark start equal 100. I want to start not at 0, but start at 100. Well, it doesn't work because I haven't actually written the code yet, right? So if you can put any URL parameters you want, and your server has to look at them and decide to do something. We haven't written that code yet, so nothing happens. Let's go ahead and make something happen. So what we can do is, in our get method, the first thing we want to do is get the value of that URL parameter. And this is how we do it. We'll, in self, which remember is a request handler, we can get the request object and call a get method on it, and give it the name of the URL parameter we're interested in. And let's store that in a local variable. And that's it. This gets the URL parameter start. If it exists, it'll store it in our local variable start. It'll return it, we store it. If it doesn't exist, it'll return none. So now what we can do is say if start exists, then let's define a start value, say start num, to be equal to convert start, which is a string, right? All these URL parameters are strings, so we'll have to convert that to an integer. If it doesn't exist, well, then let's start num to its default value, which we can just say let it be 0. All right, so now let's use it. Let's go ahead and define in our square function a start num. Now we have to use it. We can just in range, the range actually takes multiple parameters. If you only give one parameter, it goes from 0 up to 10, up to that number. If you give it 2 parameters, then the first parameter is the start. So we can just say go from start up to this ending value. Maybe we always want 10 of them for now, so we'll say start num plus 10. Right, so now square has a start num. Let's use it. Self.square start num. And that should do it. Let's go over here, refresh, and look at that. We've got squares starting at 100. Pretty cool. And we can actually now change this to anything we want. Let's do start at 20. And it really does work. We are taking this parameter, sending it to the server. The server is using that parameter and executing code based on it and returning values back in this JSON format, which for now we're just displaying, but it would be very straightforward for us to interpret that. If we wrote code to read that JSON, we could parse that JSON and do something with it, and we'll get to that before long too. Alright, I just want to show you one last thing, which is how to have multiple parameters. I've shown you in this syntax here, question mark parameter equal value. If you want to have more than one URL parameter, then you have to separate the multiple parameters with an and, an ampersand. So question mark says everything after this is URL parameters. Each URL parameter is separated by and. So let's say maybe how many we want. Length equals, maybe I want more than 10, I want 20 of them. Again, we haven't implemented length yet, so if I press return, I'm still just going to get 10. Now we know how to do this. This is really straightforward. Let's just go ahead and define square to work with length. Let's take a second parameter, which is length. Instead of always adding 10, let's add length. And now we need to call square with len. But of course we haven't defined it yet, so let's go ahead and define it. Let's go ahead and we can just basically duplicate all of this code for accessing a URL parameter, but this time we'll say, I'll call it len string. We're going to get the len parameter, and if len string is defined, then we'll set len equal to int of len string. Otherwise, we'll set length equal to 10. That should do it. Let's go over here. We've asked for 20 of these things. And sure enough, now we get 20 squares starting at 20. Let's ask for 30 of them instead. Yeah, it really works. All right, we are off and running with writing server programs that can take input and generate output. And if we want to upload this to our public host, all we have to do is click this deploy button. But I won't even bother because we know how to do that now.